English 212A. Welcome. I noticed that people have been having a little difficulty with Edward Taylor, so I want to just add a little more information on him. He is a late Renaissance poet. He's often associated with metaphysical poets, poets like John Donne, George Herbert, and he uses really extreme metaphors, as you've seen in looking at his work. One thing I want to say about Taylor, his metaphors are really extreme, bizarre, grotesque sometimes, and most people who study Taylor interpret this as his way of showing the faulty powers of humans. Humans try to approximate and try to really understand God, but finally humans fail in trying to express their love for God, their awareness of God. And this poetry displays that by being odd, by being a little off, by being peculiar. And so I'm going to look at some of the specific poetry right now. Let's look at Edward Taylor's Meditation 8. I'll read some of it, starting here. I kenning through astronomy divine, the world's bright battlement. And so this word kenning seems a little obscure for a lot of modern readers. In this situation, it means perceive or see. Another meaning of the word kenning is understand. And I think it's primarily Scottish dialect, but it's pretty much like I see. And then so it's as if he's saying, I looking through astronomy. And we'd probably interpret that as looking at the sky. And then he says divine. And that would also be a word kind of like kenning. It means to see here. It's a verb. He's looking through astronomy and he divines, meaning he sees. And it's interesting that he uses that verb there, divine, because it suggests religious connotations. And then so he's examining the world, and he has some interesting capitalizations. So the world's bright battlement. And we have a little note here that says, discerning by means of a divine astronomy the towers of heaven. Taylor goes on to suggest that there is an invisible golden path from this world to the gates of heaven. The footnote emphasizes that this word divine is an adjective, and so they say divine astronomy. This shows the ambiguity in Taylor. Divine can have two meanings, and so it seems like he's trying to draw this line between the world and heaven. And this continues with, wherein I spy a golden path my pencil cannot line. And so this implies that he's unable to illustrate, describe the trek or the journey from, or the way to connect to heaven. And so he continues, from that bright throne unto my threshold lie, and while my puzzled thoughts about it pour, I find the bread of life in it at my door. And so this emphasizes a gift given to him. It's something he can't figure out on his own. And so the power of grace comes from God. And it's something that you have to be wholly dependent on God for. You can't figure it out strictly on your own. And that's the first stanza. The next stanza, right here, uses bird to represent the human soul. And the human soul is in the body, the wicker cage, my corpse. And so this is an interesting metaphor, the soul as a bird stuck in the body. And then he mentions that this being ate the fruit forbade. And so this would be in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit. And so before we had the covenant of works, but that wasn't enough for people to be in favor with God anymore. The covenant of works was gone. And that's what this mentions. And so did fling away its food, and lost its golden days, and fell into celestial famine sore. And so humans are pretty much starving after that because they don't have a connection to God anymore. And now he talks about this really tough situation. The covenant of works doesn't work anymore. In this stanza, he's mentioning that we have all these people who are hungry for something more. They only get food that takes care of their bodies, but they need something for their souls. And so I'll read more of this. Alas, alas, poor bird, what wilt thou do? It's talking about the soul. The creature's field no food for souls ever gave. So there's something lacking in normal food. And if thou knock at angels' door, they show an empty barrel. There's nothing to feed the souls of humanity. And then this phrase, they no soul bread have, is interesting. That's a nice image, soul bread. And it reminds me of a 20th century notion of soul food. It's an interesting kind of like play that comes out of American thinking about religion and food. I'll continue. Alas, poor bird, the world's white loaf is done, meaning that the food from the Garden of Eden doesn't really exist anymore. There is no covenant of works to help people get to heaven or receive grace or feel favor from God, and cannot yield thee here the smallest crumb. And then this next stanza is when things get really bizarre, very extreme. And some people commented on this in the Taylor posts, and I'll read it. In this sad state, God's tender bowels run out streams of grace, and he, to end all strife, the purest wheat in heaven, his dear, dear Son grinds, and kneads up into this bread of life. And so you get this image of God giving grace to humans through Jesus, but it's such a grotesque, bizarre image because there's the mention of the word bowels here. And this would be associated with sympathy and warmth, the inside of a person's body. But he could have said from God's heart, but he chose to say bowels. So there's something really strange about this. And we think this image is almost like diarrhea. So you have God squirting diarrhea, and this is the grace. And so there's something just almost subversive in it. But I don't think Taylor really is being subversive. He's emphasizing his own weakness in describing how grace is dispensed. He's showing his own flaws as a human, and he's accentuating them, emphasizing them to show that humans are pretty weak, even kind of lame, and he's providing it in a very strange way. And so it gets us thinking about our own weakness. This poetry wasn't published in his life, as I said before, and so it's for his own private reflection on parts of the Bible. And so there's even this image of God grinding up. It seems like that's one way of reading this, his Son into bread. And so even that is so strange, to see God grinding up Jesus into bread and kneads up into this bread of life. And this needs here, of course, is an image of pushing on dough, mashing it, getting it ready to be cooked, but also it even suggests need, human need. And so the poem continues, being very odd. I'll jump to the last stanza. What grace is this need in this loaf? Another play on the word need. We can hear N-E-E-D there. This thing souls are but petty things it to admire. Ye angels help. This fill would to the brim heaven's whelm down. Crystal meal bowl, yea, and higher. And so we think of this image of heaven overflowing into the bread. And then this last part is really intriguing. This bread of life dropped in thy mouth doth cry, eat me, eat me. or eat, eat me, soul, and thou shalt never die. So the host, the wafer, the cracker, the bread is actually talking to the person who is taking it, and it's supposed to be Jesus' voice saying, eat me, I'll help you. But it is a kind of surreal, bizarre image to think of food talking to you, telling you to eat it. It almost seems like something somebody might hallucinate, or it's just such a bizarre image. Um, but it is emphasizing how we need grace to have eternal life. And according to the old fashioned Puritan way, before you were allowed to take communion, you would have to give a conversion narrative, and the minister and other elders would have to accept it as legitimate before you would be allowed at the communion table. And so there is this sense that you would be a person with grace before you were allowed to have this bread. Meditation 26, I think, exemplifies how Taylor really is a poet who has great humility about himself, and his extreme metaphors seem to be a sign of his humility. And so this first stanza seems to really portray this. Taylor writes, unclean, unclean, my Lord undone, all vile, yea, all defiled. What shall thy servants do? Unfit for thee, not fit for holy soil, nor for communion of saints below. A bag of botches, lump of loathsomeness, defiled by touch, by issue, leprous flesh. And so he's emphasizing that he himself is really dirty, is very low. He sees humanity as incredibly dependent on the power of God because we are empty and just weak. And so much of his poetry really emphasizes our flaws, his own flaws. And he sees God as infinitely high. And so this huge separation between God and normal people for him is amazing and is a source for inspiration. And the way he portrays this is often kind of bizarre, but it's because he seems like he has such an intense sense of this separation. And so much of this poetry shows his humility.